If you take nothing from this 24 minutes, I want you to take this. As IT people, we need to stop servicing locations and start servicing people.
So thanks everyone for joining our webinar, The Future of Work Anywhere. This is obviously a very relevant topic, so we've got a full virtual house today. And we've got Scott Kinka presenting today, founding partner and CTO of Evolve IP. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Scott.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We've got a brisk agenda today, 24 minutes, and I've been told that I have to absolutely keep to it, so to give time for questions. We like to do these little 24 minutes to make sure that we share knowledge in a quick format, in a way that makes sense. Obviously, it's 24 minutes, so we'll get nerdy, but not super nerdy today, and just share with you a little bit about what we're learning from businesses and how they're reacting on the backside of a pandemic, and talk a little bit about the blueprint for preparing to make what have become, rushed plans in a lot of cases, permanent work anywhere solutions. Now what, right? Ultimately, that's the question. David Kenny, who's the CEO of Nielsen, said, we're trying things out in 24 hours and then just rolling it out. Feels very different from the history in IT, the way we've historically attempted to do things, right? I'm not going to spend some time focusing on the doom and gloom of the pandemic. I think we all know what the situation was. And I think that the reality of the situation is we're in the greatest DR test of all time. And you know what? We did okay, right? Most businesses are still up in some format. And there's no secret to the reason that we used the duct tape analogy here on this slide. That's really what our customers are experiencing. They said, you know what, we got out and we got a portion of the way there. Now, how did we get a portion of the way there? First, thank God for the cloud. I think in a lot of ways, the cloud and in particular collaboration solutions, probably saved the economy in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of legacy infrastructure that remains inside the business, and we just weren't prepared to send everyone home at the same time, right? In fact, one of the senior directors at Gartner said, we're being forced into the world's largest work from home experiment, and so far, it hasn't been easy for a lot of organizations to implement. So, that's what we're hearing from our customers right now, is we did all right. We managed to get some things up. We kind of have a little bit of a mess now. We need to figure out how to go from duct tape to something that's a little bit more permanent, right? And as I said, we learned that businesses got partway back to normalcy. But I guess the question really is what is normal? Here's a question to think about. Are open offices and employee densification a thing of the past? I'm not even sure if densification is the right conjugation, but I'm going to go with it. 9/11 happened. We had a telecom bust. We had a 2008, economic downturn. And we responded, corporate America, in a lot of ways, squeezing more people into smaller locations. And I think in a lot of ways that worked. It certainly worked with our younger team members. We saw collaboration increases. But now we're in a situation where, that trend, while maybe we enjoy it and maybe it works, it may be reversing itself, right? So I don't know if they're a thing of the past, but I know that they're different. I know that our locations have changed forever. And what that means for the IT department is a really interesting thing. And if you take nothing from this 24 minutes, I want you to take this. As IT people, we need to stop servicing locations and start servicing people. And that really has a lot to do with the very beginning of the blueprint. We're going to get to it in a few slides. Talks about understanding the people, building profiles, and then building up from there. And that's really what the blueprint is about, as we go through that. But think about that. We need to stop servicing locations and start servicing people, right? In fact, a lot of the folks that we know who are in commercial real estate, Robert Walters has a recruitment firm, 4,500-person recruitment firm. Robert Walters is the name of the firm. He says they could see a 25% reduction in office space as leases expire. We're sitting here in our shiny new headquarters that we moved into during the pandemic, and it's largely empty, right? So the question here is, whether what a lot of businesses are talking about is trying to make their temp plans the permanent plans. So is the office not the remote worker, the temp solution. I mean, historically as IT, we've always been able to say, what's the good enough for the remote worker? But then what's the good in the office? And I think that's flipping. I mean, in reality, we're hearing a lot of trends right now about offices moving to be collaboration centers, meaning you don't really have a desk. We just have desks, right? And you come in when you need to, you come in on a schedule, you come in to collaborate with your teams. But there's been this forced adoption into collaboration tools that we need to figure out how to embrace. And our associates are right behind us, right? Most of the folks who are being surveyed now on the backside of the pandemic are saying, hey, you know what, we did this. Sure, we had the dog. Sure, we had the kids. Sure, we had stuff going on. But the reality of it is that, you know, a lot of businesses are moving now to permanent work from home options, or at least having it as an option, right? You guys have seen the big names. Airtasker said studied 1,000 workers and found that telecommuting employees work an extra 17 days per year. The Society of Human Resource Management said employers say that 2/3 of employees are more productive at home than they are in the office. The new normal is still moving, but I think we have a feel for what it is. And that's what the blueprint's really all about. Now, here's what's interesting, though. In the midst of the employee layout changing, our IT has changed as well over the last couple of years, right? We've really moved away from PC-centric workspaces. You know, your workspace was PC-centric. It had installed applications. It had a well-defined perimeter. It lived inside of a location, right? We had 4 walls and a perimeter that we could build and we could protect. We would give somebody a PC. They would install the applications they needed, but we would create this endless cycle of upgrades and one-to-one inefficient support. And everybody had a different profile. And even the best of us, right, were struggling more or less to keep a couple of desktop images floating around the business, right? It's always the CEO who wants the one Mac in the building or wants the Shopper app, you know, installed on the browser. And that's what we're generally having to contend with. But we've been able to do that inside of our 4 walls. And these 4 walls, while it was one-to-one management, they were well within our control. Now we've moved to something far more flexible, right? That's the good news. Thanks for the cloud. You know, Salesforce, Workday, SAP, Oracle, Box, Dropbox, you know, you name it. And obviously all of the collaboration tools that many of us have adopted so quickly in the middle of a pandemic. You know, it moved critical applications outside so we could get to them. We could get to them from anywhere. We could get to them from locations. Far more flexible. But the reality of it is, you know, also in a lot of ways, you know, far more complex. Because our perimeter moved. A lot of ways what we're contending with here is who are our users and what are their needs. If you think about that, you know, we started to create this perimeterless office, and we started to move out people to web applications that had our critical data in them with multiple usernames and passwords in each of them on poorly secured home networks. And then we left critical legacy applications in the building. Right, so accounting, ERP, CRM, you know, Joe's accounting app that you've been trying to get out of the business for 10 years, but it's just not going to go away, right? And things like servers and VPNs and backup in a lot of cases are existing and remaining inside the 4 walls of our business for the 1 or 2 business apps that just aren't yet SaaS. Many of our customers find when they really sit down and profile their businesses, their users, that they fall into 3 categories, basically SaaS-only users, SaaS users who maybe have 1 or 2 applications that they have to get to that still live inside the business, and then sort of their power users who really are a smaller window of people who actually need a start menu on a device that's provided by the business, right? So the key in the very beginning of the roadmap, right, the very beginning of the blueprint for making this permanent is to figure out how to go all in. Right, embrace the cloud, embrace the remote worker while maintaining security, and that starts with understanding your users. Right, who are they? How many profiles do you actually have? What applications do they need? Once you understand that, you can start to think about an IT strategy for each of them, and that strategy obviously begins with identity. All right, what we have done is we've created a sprawl of usernames and passwords across the cloud, and where it begins is understanding these identities and needs, and then beginning to figure out ways to control them. Right. How do I get my applications under a single password? How do I onboard and offboard? It used to be that you join them to the domain and you were good to go. But what happens now to their Office 365 account and their Salesforce.com account and their Dropbox account and all these other places where critical information is that you don't have control over? right? And then how do you do that while providing a convenient experience for single sign-on to the end user? How do you deploy multi-factor authentication and not have to do it 10 times, once for each individual application that you have out there in the cloud, right? Once you contain the identity, you have control. And then you need to determine how you're actually going to deliver those applications. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about application delivery next. But identity management, orchestration, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, how many SaaS apps, how many legacy line of business apps do you have DaaS users potentially out there? We'll talk about that in a minute, but start with your identities. Getting back to that perimeter thing, this is a Gartner image I just wanted to share with you. It looks outrageously complicated, but in reality, what you see on the left is what our business look like, right? On-premise data centers, corporate Wi-Fi, client managed tools and domain joined PCs and corporate owned lockdown PCs and offices. And we couldn't be further from that today. And ultimately that takes you to the second section to be thinking about, which is really securing your devices and networks. So, once you've controlled your identity, you need to think about how your users are going to work. And this is really the second part of the blueprint. What's the device? Is the device work supplied? Are you allowing them to bring their own device? If they are bringing their own device, what's your replacement policy? If they happen to break it or lose it, are you going to pay for it, or do they have to go get their own? Is that part of the work scenario? What about their network quality? We've had many customers come to us and say, you know what, this all worked. We got home, everybody's meeting online, but we have different equipment, different cameras, different headsets, different audio, crappy networks, good networks, right? How do we make this consistent? We have some of our partners on the call. I've been having conversations with many of you where, honestly, our belief is a lot of businesses are going to move away from, lots of access and locations and start to think about how do they do a brokerage deal for broadband access so that everybody gets a consistent one, even if they're paying for it themselves. Right? For those PCs, if you're sending them home, what's your remote monitoring and management and updating policies? Are you going to insist that somebody who brings their own device actually falls under your remote monitoring and patching policies? Right? What happens when somebody comes back to the office after being home with a BYOD device and then joins it to their domain? Or won't you allow that to happen? Right? So, these are things that have always been questions that we've had to ask, but it was always for a subset of our users. Right. So again, the next part of the blueprint is to think about the devices and the networks. What are the devices going to be? What are the networks they're going to be on? And then if you attach that to the identities that we talked about before that, you're in a position to be able to go, maybe I don't need VPNs. Maybe I don't need clunky access back into the network. How many of my users are actually just SaaS? And I need to manage and maintain that. Right. One of the things that Gartner saw post-COVID, they published in one of their papers, they said many workers lacked the basic digital dexterity required to assemble and connect their new home office. So we sent people home with PCs that they really didn't know what to do with on the home network, right? They were contending with the local network congestion, kids on their own Zoom calls for school, all of that. Right. So that's the next part, is to think about the corporate supplied PCs, to think about where the edge of your corporate network is, and then to consider, are there other technologies? Do I need to be on a VPN? Can I get all this stuff pushed out? How do I SaaSify the applications in my business that aren't SaaS yet today? Okay. Number 3, let's talk about collaboration. I think it's safe to say that Teams and Slack and Zoom and others, but those are the big names, won the day. I mean, they benefited greatly from COVID, but it's also safe to say that most businesses didn't have a good plan for implementing them before COVID, which means that we got home, we struggled to get online, we finally got to an okay normal. Right, equipping employees with SaaS-based, personal and team productivity applications are what Gartner's calling the new work nucleus. It was essential, but most employees were not sufficiently adept at using the applications. We are having more calls right now about cleaning up Microsoft Teams than we are about implementing it. And what I mean by that is people went out, they had Office 365. All right, we're going to solve this with Teams. They turned it all on. File sharing permissions and team collaboration and the ability to create teams. And now they have a place to have meetings and a completely unreliable, not backed up, unstructured, and potentially insecure way of sharing files and communication. And they're coming in and saying, all right, how do we go ahead and clean all of that up right now? And collaboration isn't just COVID technology, right? It requires thoughtful planning, policies, expectations. And one other thing to think about here as you're thinking about collaboration is it's not just about video conferencing, right? It's about everything else that's now going into the collaboration tool that used to be in an area that you controlled, right? If you're, we're a Microsoft Teams shop and we distribute Microsoft Teams and support it. So I'll use that as an example. When you deploy Teams, you have chat that used to be an email now going in there. You have files that used to be on your G Drive being shared in there. Have you looked at those permissions, right? Those files used to be under your control and in backup. When they all got to Office 365, what's your backup out strategy? Or isn't there one, right? There's no magic PST like you have on Mail sitting behind the collaboration elements in Teams for chat and file sharing. How do you pick it up and move it if you have a problem or you want to move to another vendor in the future? So those are the things that you have to think about. Our suggestion is you need to be ripping off the duct tape sooner than later. Are you a Microsoft shop? Are you a Google shop? Are you using Apple tools? Are you committed to Zoom? What are those? Because your PBX will become the thing that you attach to that collaboration tool, not the thing you get from your PBX vendor. Big prediction there, but something to think about. In the next 2 years, if you're already on a hosted solution, you won't be buying a $30 seat that includes a meeting solution. You'll already be committed to a meeting solution and be looking at somebody who can integrate a PBX that still opens the front door and has overhead paging and it's a contact center and IVRs and all that traditional stuff that's not in there. Right? But you won't be making those decisions together because you're already committed to this tool and you're not pulling this information out. So choose sooner than later. Contact centers were a mess during COVID. So if you are someone who has a call center or a contact center, you really need to think about the overall agent experience. So that's the next part of the blueprint for you to consider. Many large call centers still use on-prem equipment for their omni-channel support solutions. And perhaps as important, in some cases more important, they're still using local applications and PC infrastructure to support the agent's use of the applications that they're providing support on. So even those customers that move to the cloud for contact center, some of them are our own, some of them that have leveraged solutions from our competitors for contact center solutions have come to us during COVID and saying, this is great, but I had to send desktop PCs home. Why? Because agents aren't typically people who you're deploying laptops to. Traditionally, it's your most transient workforce. It's your most seasonal workforce. It's oftentimes your lowest compensated part of the workforce, depending on what kind of business that you're in, right? I had a customer literally send me a picture of a desktop PC and monitor strapped to the front of a canoe going to someone's home in a contact center that was located in the Pacific Rim. There's a lot of great contact center agents out there. The Philippines, stuff in India, Malaysia, areas like that are very hot for agents right now. And many of them use a cloud-based contact center, but they still have to worry about the application infrastructure, right? So when you're thinking about supporting home agents, it's not just a unified versus overlay discussion around a contact center solution, but it's also about what are those key integrations? What are your rules of engagements? What are your KPIs? What are those other applications? How are they going to work? Go back to that first step. What's the contact center agent profile? What are the apps they need? Are they SaaS? How do I secure it? How do I orchestrate them? How do I onboard them? How do I offboard them quickly? All right, so again, we're servicing people, not servicing locations. All right, so that fourth portion is really about working from anywhere with support agents. Now, once you're able to do that, that puts us all in a great position to hire anywhere. Hire anywhere for the future of our business. As locations, become less important and people become more important. That also means that you can seek out people and not seek out people's proximity to the location. But every one of those steps, and I'll just go back to go through them, remain incredibly important. I'll hit them really quick. Who are our users and what are their needs? What are the applications that they need? How do I manage the identities if they're using multiple applications? Are they just SaaS? Do they need legacy line of business applications? Maybe they need a start menu. How am I going to deliver that, right? Once we've determined those people, what are the devices that they're going to use? Are they theirs? Are they ours? How do we manage them if they're ours and they're at home? What do we think about network and consistency? Do we still need that VPN, or do we really just need to weed that one last app, Joe's accounting app, out of the business and get that up in the cloud, right? Embrace your collaboration solution. You went there to solve a really immediate need, but now it's time to make it permanent. There are vendors, Evolve IP among them, who can help you come in and clean up those implementations, and also think about what that means to integrate traditional hybrid technology to support the regular PBX functions that do matter inside the four walls of the business, because your locations might be de-emphasized, but they're not going away. All right. Think about your agents. Don't forget about them. And it's not just about the ability for them to take phone calls. It's also about the applications they need to use. And the device management strategy is just, if not more important in this agent scenario. Once you go through those, however, you've got the option to hire anywhere, find and employ better candidates, simplify your onboarding and terminations, and reduce your expenses across all of that. So here we are. I'm up 22 minutes in on a 24-minute webinar. We started 2 minutes late. So those are the high-level topics. What you're able to do, if you're interested in seeing much more depth on each of these topics, what we would ask you to do is head to evolveip.net/blueprint. Get yourself a copy of the blueprint document. Certainly that's a good way and a good means to sort of start your own planning to think about the permanence of these things. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, obviously, Evolve IP, workanywhere.net. This is what we do. Obviously been in collaboration for a really long time, and unified communications. We deliver the best of breed collaboration solutions from Microsoft and Cisco unified together in a hybrid scenario that supports both work from home and collaboration natively inside of Teams, and premise-based PBX, oriented, physical needs. That's all part of that unified communication suite. We offer desktop as a service and identity management solutions to help that work from home, device, RMM, identity management, SaaS unification topic we were talking about. We're a Gartner acclaimed contact center as a service vendor as well, uniquely positioned there not only to help your agents get home from a phone call and chat perspective, but also leveraging that identity management and desktop service as a service platform to be able to deliver them their applications in a way that you can secure, regardless of whether it's your PC or theirs. So with that, 23-ish minutes in, I'm going to open it up for questions in the chat, and hopefully we can have a few minutes of spirited discussion before we all let you get back to your day.